So welcome to the Troy Interfaith Group's June meeting. I am Chris Hallam. I am the pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church of Troy. I am also the convener here of this group, and I just want to say on behalf of everyone of TIG, welcome and thank you. Thank you for taking the time tonight to take a night off from sitting on the couch with Netflix and instead be here to build some relationships, to learn a little bit and to be part of this community. It really does mean a lot that you are here and present this evening. So welcome. Just a few announcements before we turn it over. We have two things coming up. So first of all, this is our last monthly meeting that we're going to have for a little bit. We're taking the summer off to do a little bit of advanced planning. Our next meeting is for the International Day of Peace, with which Beacon Unitarian Church has offered to host. And so that's going to be in September. And so we want to plan that. So that's our next meeting way up ahead, but we're planning it starting now. So you all are invited to join us on Thursday, June 16th at 10 a.m. to help be a part of that planning committee. One of the reasons why we're taking a little bit of time off is because our leadership team right now is on the smaller side and we can only do so much. So if you are interested in helping out, that actually makes it so we can put on more events and we have more energy to put towards the details of things, because a lot of these events take time planning. So please let us know. You get our email, so feel free to respond to that email if you want to say, hey, you're coming. And we would be happy to share any more details of what being on leadership or helping planning means. But with that said, those are our announcements. I would like to turn it over to Hermione and David from the Race Amity Forum of Detroit. So let's give our gracious welcome and applause to our speakers for tonight. So go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna hit the share button here. There we go. And share sound. Although we only have one thing to share in terms of sound. Okay.
Hermione, could you speak up a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I was mostly talking to myself, so, but can you hear me now? Okay, good. Well, greetings, everyone. I'm Hermione Pickens.
And I'm David Henderson.
And it's a pleasure to be here to share with you a few perspectives of the Race Amity Forum Detroit Metro on the subject of racial amity. We'd like to thank Bob Schneewise first for introducing and connecting us with the Troy Interfaith Group, and Ruth Turner for her dedicated follow-through on making this happen tonight. So we'll first share briefly about the Race Amity Forum and how it came to be. Our presentation tonight is divided into roughly 4 parts, if you want to call it that. The first is our history. After that, we'll share, how the idea of race amity and the other tradition was developed within our organization. The kinds of programs we've offered, we'll share that too, based on what we felt were in the context of racial amity. And then finally, the next steps or a call to action.
Thank you, Hermione, for giving that brief introduction. So some of our history, during the June of 2018, excuse me, a group of participants around the country took part in a Wilmette Institute course called Racism in America, the Most Challenging Issue. And this was a 12-week course that emerged, and we developed a study group here. 8 of us met for 2 weeks throughout the summer and fall, seeking ways in which to involve our community in dialogue regarding this most challenging issue of race and so on. The founding members were Lynn Deal from Ferndale and myself, David Henderson from Clarkston, Karen Nellums from Birmingham, Beverly Nichols from Detroit, who has since passed away. Blair Nichols, her daughter, who was from Detroit and is now in Iowa. Hermione Pickens is in Detroit now. Morris Richardson from Detroit, and Jan Staten from Troy. And I know many of you know Jan. So it's been quite a learning adventure. As we started, we did not know that we were going to end up creating a Race Amity Forum. But here we are a couple of years later, and this is our story.
We began hosting monthly public gatherings in January of 2019. As our mission statement declared, advancing cross-racial and cross-cultural amity to positively impact the discourse on race. We knew we wanted to fulfill that mission by initiating discussion around individual and collaborative efforts being done in the path of racial amity, demonstrating race amity ideals, virtues, standards, and practices to more effectively promote the unity of mankind, and by working to ensure the peace and well-being of the Detroit metro community, and by association, the state, the country, and the world.
And we had to grant at that time that we didn't have a clue of how to proceed. But nonetheless, we created our first gathering in honor of Martin Luther King Day, and viewing the film entitled An American Story, Race Amity and the Other Tradition, which helped us focus our thoughts on what our mission might be. So we proceeded along these lines to try to figure out how we could actually improve race relations rather than just repeating things that were going on in current events and joining the groups of people that rehash over and over again the problems of society. We wanted to become part of the solution. So doctors Richard Thomas and William Smitty Smith created this film, and it really sparked great interest and engaging conversation amongst the people who attended.
And then the second gathering, that was the first gathering that we had. The second gathering featured guest presenter Dr. Richard W. Thomas himself, noted author, scholar, historian, and race relations advocate, who shared details and the impetus behind the creation of An American Story, Race Amity and the Other Tradition, more formally subtitled A Historical Look at Interracial and Multicultural Unity and Cooperation, with a view toward understanding its social significance. This was based on a book of the same name, that you can see there. The Other Tradition concept was more clearly defined and offered as a viable parallel to the racial injustices perpetrated throughout this country's history. Not just a parallel, but an imperative in the struggle against such a formidable force.
So Dr. Thomas and his co-collaborator, Dr. William Smith, wrote The Other Tradition in our national history based on a moral principle, the moral principle of the organic oneness of humankind. The Other Tradition has been a constant parallel to racism in America, they say. A key element of the Other Tradition and the propellant for its success is amity. In the context of human relationships, it's easily understood why amity or friendship is central to progressive action for racial equality and justice. This is because there are two primary affinity relationships in human affairs. The first is love and caring for family, and the second one is love and caring for friends. Amity inspires commitment and support that includes willingness to take risks and engage in personal sacrifice. All advances for access, equity, and social justice begin with amity or friendship and collaboration across racial and cultural boundaries. This is a statement that Drs. Thomas and William Smith put together that we wanted to share.
Now, Dr. Thomas first conceived this whole concept as a result of students in his Michigan State University classroom, particularly Caucasian students, being traumatized and becoming depressed, actually, by learning of the subjugation, oppression, and denigration of a race of people, African Americans, to the degree that they were. To counter that effect, Dr. Thomas began sharing the parallel efforts of those who have always envisioned a different kind of society, the other tradition. We know about the tradition of racism, he says, and it's important that we study the tradition of racism. But at the same time, we must understand that there is a parallel tradition. They're interrelated. People of different races and ethnic backgrounds have come together to address social injustices throughout our history. The other tradition dates back to 1619 with the origins of European settlement in North America, Jamestown, Virginia, in fact. Captured slaves were brought there, and while enslavement grew in reach, the other tradition was in bloom as well, with interracial communities appearing along Virginia's eastern shore from around the 1650s to the 1670s.
In these communities, the social position of Africans in the early colonies was a source of considerable debate until recently. Some scholars have argued that they were separated from European servants and treated differently from the beginning. Later historians, however, have shown that there was no such uniformity in the treatment of Africans in those early days. Records indicate that many Africans and their descendants were set free after their periods of servitude. They were able to purchase land and even bought servants and owned slaves of their own. Some African men became wealthy tradesmen, craftsmen, or farmers, and their skills were widely recognized. They voted, appeared in courts, engaged in business and commercial dealings, and exercised all the civil rights of other free men. Some free Africans intermarried, and their children suffered little or no special discriminations. Other Africans were poor and lived with other poor men and women. Blacks and whites worked together, drank together, ate together, played together, and frequently ran away together. Moreover, the poor of all colors protested together against the policies of the government. At least 25% of the rebels, for instance, in the Bacon's Rebellion were African of descent. And for the first 6 or 7 decades of colonial history, there seems to have been open and fluid relationships between the races, where there was no ideology of inequality or inferiority. And all of these facts come from the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yes, thank you, David. You know, those who were running away, they were both servants and freedmen. Just to clarify. Now, I am not going to take credit for this transitioning on this slide, just so you know. Some of the objectives, though, of Dr. Thomas's efforts to help the students in his class. He did that to help them understand the historical and social significance of the other tradition. He wanted to inspire those students to engage in activities that promote cooperation among racially and culturally diverse people. He wanted to help students recognize the tradition at work in the present and encourage them to become involved in projects that promote multiracial cooperation and unity. He also wanted to encourage faculty and scholars to focus some of their scholarly and teaching efforts on multiracial cooperation and unity. Not taking credit for this one either. There. To continue, he wanted to expand the understanding of the racial history of the United States. He also wanted to provide models for white students to emulate and provide models to restore the students of color's trust and confidence in the protracted struggle for racial justice and multiracial cooperation and unity. To
this end, Dr. Thomas put together for this presentation that we drew his slides. He was kind enough to share his slides with us. We drew 4 examples of interracial cooperation. Of the 18 different examples that he used in this slide presentation that we drew from, and of the thousands more that are out there waiting to be discovered and appreciated. So we talked about in the early days, the first 6 or 7 decades, of relative equality in the race relationships. And gradually that equality was eroded and lost. And a pushback against that erosion was Bacon's rebellion in 1676, where, as we said, approximately 25% of the people that rebelled were actually Black slaves and white servants who fought together to try to create a more equitable community. So this is the first example that we wanted to share. The possibility of a genuinely multiracial society became a reality during the years before Bacon's rebellion. Another time period would be, of course, there was the time just before the Civil War where there was the Underground Railroad, interracial cooperation. This was the first large-scale opportunity for the development of Black and white cooperation across the continent that reached all the way up into Canada. Racial tensions as a developmental stage of anti-slavery movement were occurring, and people were pushing back against it. And the friendships that crossed the racial lines and empowered them to be able to continue the struggle in this anti-slavery movement. And I would call out the name of William Lloyd Garrison as being one of the Caucasian people that was instrumental in this process too. So another very significant time was the development of the NAACP in 1909 and has existed all the way through to the present. It is the oldest civil rights organization in the country and has the longest record of interracial and multiracial unity and cooperation, and has been called the New Abolitionists. And Moorfield Story, Marianne Ovington, and W.E. Du Bois were creators of the NAACP. So right from the beginning, it was an interracial organization expressing this other American tradition of race amity. And the fourth example that we wanted to draw on to show this tradition of race amity is actually the civil rights movement. It was really hard to choose which events to highlight, because each one just leads right from one to the next, of course. So the civil rights movement oftentimes referred to the people who were working together as the beloved community and the vision of a beloved community. Northern white students were working in the South as freedom fighters in 1964. There was multiracial and multi-faith freedom marches, and the impact of the Black Power movement on interracial racialism, and the whole time period was percolating with a new spirit and laid the foundation for laws that have continued to work their way through the social fabric of our society to create more equity and a greater open up greater potentials for everyone to have their potential, everything from education to housing. So many areas have been impacted by the civil rights movement.
Also part of the other tradition, the National Center for Race Amity, which was formed January of 2010 in Boston, Massachusetts by Dr. William H. Smitty Smith, its founder. The NCRA states, race relations in America will not substantially improve unless the public discourse on race moves beyond the blame, grievance, rejection framework to one that recognizes and celebrates our ability to overcome racial prejudice through association, amity, and collaboration. While the tradition of racial oppression was unfolding, a parallel tradition, largely hidden and poorly understood, was demonstrating some of the most positive qualities to be found in American history. This third of close collaboration, amity, and love has served as the moral and spiritual counterweight to the dominant tradition of racism that occupies so much of our national history. The other tradition offers a new entry point for the public discourse on race.
I think that's so profound. The other tradition offers a new entry point for the public discourse on race. So in May of 21, a film was released, The Roots of the Race Amity Movement, and a video commemorating the 100th anniversary of the holding of the first Race Amity Conference in the United States. The National Center for Race Amity explores and clearly outlines the historical roots of the Race Amity movement in America. So we'd like to show you a clip that describes that first Race Amity conference.
At the end of May 1921, the nation's capital played host to a multiracial, interfaith gathering, the likes of which had rarely been seen in the segregated South. For 3 days, thousands of people assembled at the First Congregational Church of Washington, D.C., in the first ever convention for amity between the colored and white races. One of the key contributors to this history-making visionary event was an African-American son of slaves who was a man of deep faith, a scholar, a lawyer, an ardent believer in race unity. His name was Louis G. Gregory. The narrative that frames this documentary is taken from his diary reports of events at the 1921 National Convention of Amity Between the Races.
The North and the South, Orient and Occident, colored and white, mingled in a picturesque setting of 5 sessions over a period of 3 days. The First Congregational Church, which in past years had welcomed so many liberal and progressive groups, opened its doors for all sessions. Among the distinguished people who aided the endeavor were Reverend Dr. Jason Noble Pierce, Honorable Moses E. Clapp, former senator from Nebraska, Senator Samuel Shortridge of California, C. Lee Cook, famous Southern businessman, Dr. Elaine Locke, Honorable Martin B. Madden, Congressman from Illinois, William H. Randall, Professor George W. Cook, Mrs. Coralie Franklin Cook, Roy C. Wilhelm, Janabi Fadl Mezandariani of Iran, and Lieutenant General Nelson A. Miles, commanding the American Army.
I attended every session, day and night. Many times throughout the meetings did with much effort restrain my tears. My heart leapt and throbbed and many times almost burst within my breast. I am a colored man. My race as a whole, I believe, is quite ready to welcome the glad day when all will be brothers. The trouble is nearly unilateral. God, give us the day.
It would be almost wonderful to watch that whole video. So in May of 1921, more than 100 years ago, shoulder to shoulder, in the pews of Washington, D.C.'s First Congregational Church, Thousands of men and women from various racial backgrounds, various hues, various faiths, various cultural traditions, and social classes gathered together, prayed, shared sentiments, and engaged in joyous fellowship for 3 days in an atmosphere described as spiritual and heavenly.
It was
Unheard of in recent history, this was a clear and profound display of the other tradition in full effect. Race Amity gatherings have been held around the country every year since then. The efforts of the Race Amity Forum Detroit Metro have therefore been shaped by the model of the other tradition of close collaboration, amity, and love, which has been the mainstay of our activities these past few years. Our offerings have focused on the things we can and are learning to do and what others are doing to highlight the other tradition. We actively seek out sources that support and or enhance the other tradition model. Everything from TED Talks to online radio interviews, to in-person presentations, to the study of relevant spiritual passages. Now, as time passed, our group became more informed along the way, a process which continues to this day. We grew more enlightened with each subsequent gathering, which, except for a temporary March 2020 COVID-19 interception, has continued without pause. The Race Amity Forum transitioned seamlessly from in-person to online Zoom gatherings in April of 2020. As Dr. Thomas stated, it's necessary to study the history of racism and acknowledge its seeming endless iterations and the depths thereof. Here are a couple of passages affirming the need to do so.
Racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It deprives a portion of humanity of the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of their capability and to live a meaningful and flourishing life while blighting the progress of the rest of humankind. Racism, one of the most baneful and persistent evils, is a major barrier to peace. Its practice perpetrates too outrageous a violation of the dignity of human beings to be countenanced under any pretext. Racism retards the unfoldment of boundless potentialities of its victims, corrupts its perpetrators, and blights human progress. Recognition of the oneness of mankind, implemented by appropriate legal measures, must be universally upheld if this problem is to be overcome. Both of these quotes are from the Universal House of Justice, which is the leading body of the Baha'i Faith. The first quote was from July of 2020, and the second quote was from October of 1985.
Thank you for that, David. Acknowledging this need, our offerings have included examples of how folks are working to rectify racial iniquities in this country. Okay, this first one, Theo E.J. Wilson. He's a Black YouTube activist. He gave a TED Talk, which we listened to with great interest, sharing his unique insights on how and why he infiltrated the alt-right, A-L-T, right, online community. It was humorous, yet direct. His message was clear as to why he responded the way he did to members of an organization whose ideals he did not espouse, having invaded his social media space, and negatively so. He created his own brand of justice, in this case, a survival tactic. The next was the COVID-19 pandemic, crisis within a crisis, where we explored 4 different videos focusing on the overwhelmingly disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on the Black community which included interviews with 3 young victims coping with COVID in New York City. The third one, the next one was, we looked at the Green Book. Some of you may have heard of this book. The Green Book was published from 1936 until the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It listed establishments across the United States that welcomed Blacks during a time when segregation and Jim Crow laws made travel difficult and often dangerous. You may recall there was a recent movie of the same name for which Mahershala Ali won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for portraying the real life person on whom the movie was based.
In several of our programs, we're learning about the progress that people were making in healing their hurts and growing their ability to create an interracial community of friendship and amity. So it's important to listen to their stories too. In the first slide, we have Thomas Daniels and Thomas Marsh, who grew up in Detroit and met each other as adults, and found that, to their dismay, they had very similar growing up stories. When they started to share with one another, they met one another on a basketball court as adults. So hearing them, we first heard about them because they offered to present their book at the Troy Public Library. And we put our feelers out in every which way, trying to find the good content for our programming, and we invited them to come. They were delighted to come and speak to our group. And it was so interesting to hear their story. Then Sharon Davis, she has had an internet radio talk show and published a book about racial healing. And I called Sharon and talked with her and asked her, out of all her stories, she knows our mission of race amity, what story would she recommend that we highlight in our group? And she said, without a doubt, one of the ones we should consider is the interview that she did with Plessy and Ferguson. Now, the legacy of Plessy and Ferguson goes back to a similar story that happened, a Rosa Parks story of riding on the bus. Well, Plessy and Ferguson, that story was riding on a train decades before. And the ruling went against the ability to not have segregated train passage. So in 2022, Louisiana Governor John Bell Edwards acknowledged that Plessy should never have been convicted for sitting in a whites-only rail car and refusing to leave. Now, the interesting twist on this is that Sharon's interview was Plessy and Ferguson. You see, Homer Plessy is the great first cousin of Homer Plessy. That would be Keith Plessy, and the great granddaughter of Supreme Court Judge John Howard Ferguson. That would be Phoebe Ferguson. So Keith Plessy and Phoebe Ferguson, the descendants, have joined forces to bridge the gulf separating the races by forming the Racial Justice Foundation called Plessy and Ferguson. And their story is fascinating. If you get an opportunity to hear that story, is available in audio form online. If you want to listen to it, we can give you a recitation for it.
Thank you, David. And they also have a Facebook page that's pretty active. Okay, so another presentation that we were fortunate to have was with Dr. June Manning Thomas. She is, her presentation was on thinking about the civil rights era, lessons in racial unity. She, in that presentation and in a subsequent book that was just published, she shared some really startling and amazing episodes from her challenging upbringing in South Carolina, Jim Crow era. And to help us understand where she was coming from, it took years for her to finish this book, and she would always, it was always on the back burner or side, whatever. And she just got it finished and it just got published, but it is great details about what had transpired in her life, how she managed to survive all of that and become a positive force and influence. She's a professor at the University of Michigan currently. This picture on the slide shows her as a young girl receiving the Presidential Scholar Award from President Lyndon Baines Johnson back in the 60s early. So just wanted to share about Dr. Thomas, and her book is available on Amazon.com, Struggling to Learn. Also, Dr. Robert Henderson shared in one of his sessions, he shared multiple examples or models of unity, but this one was one of the ones that really stood out for us, the Cabrini Greens project. That's really a play on words as well. Dr. Henderson shared in a recorded video a truly wonderful story that started out with one person's interest and effort and ended up involving many of the community members and benefiting them all. Cabrini Green was an area of Chicago that folks didn't even like to drive through because it had such a reputation for violence and danger. Cabrini Green housing project with its tall prison-like buildings cramped together with little to no green spaces, which were now just dirt. Some years ago, a white man from North Shore, Illinois, would every day put on knee pads, come to Cabrini Green, and systematically clean the dirt from between the buildings. No one bothered him because they thought he was insane, picking junk from the dirt. Well, over time, some of the kids in the neighborhood began asking him, "What are you doing?" He said he was about to plant a garden. They soon began helping him clean the dirt. Over time, they created vegetable gardens between all the buildings in Cabrini Green. Not lettuce and cucumbers, mind you, but radicchio and basil, arugula, for example, which they sold to some of the best restaurants in Chicago. The crazy white man was actually quite wealthy, quite sane, and knew the restaurateurs personally. Proceeds went to a college fund for all the kids working in the garden. Over a period of 15 years, 500 kids went to college. Their organization was later incorporated by one of the kids who went to law school, became a lawyer, and named it Cabrini Greens, as in vegetables, which went on to serve children, junior youth, senior youth, and their families. That was a beautiful model and success story of racial amity.
We've had other speakers too. Heather McGee, who wrote The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs All of Us. She also has given TED Talks, and we shared a TED Talk with our group and discussed many of the things that she pointed out, that the racial issue is not all black and white in the sense that what may be true in one instance or circumstance doesn't necessarily imply that something else must be true because of it. It's not a zero-sum matter. She shared the situation, for instance, that occurred in Maine, the whitest state in the nation, as she put it. Refugees from Africa, mostly Muslim, had settled in a dying mill town called Lewiston and spoke fluent French as their native tongue. Many of the existing citizens formerly knew French as their native language, but had lost it due to their own assimilation into the community and concern with other matters. These refugees began reteaching the residents of Maine their own former language, a major service to the community, which became revitalized, began thriving, and was the only community able to keep its schools open when others had to close during the recessions. So the unintended consequences of opening human potential when we embrace the others, the strangers, as friends. That's, to me, is what this story tells us.
David. We also had in 2021, January, in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we had a table of brotherhood. It was a call to service in his honor. Grassroots service acts were shared by the participants who came that day. And it was inspired by this Martin Luther King Jr. quote: "Everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul full of love."
All of our programs have not been intellectual talks and presentations. We've also tried to host other kinds of programs. So for instance, we've hosted Race Amity Day picnics. In June of 2019, we were in person. And then in 20 and 21, we hosted online picnics through Zoom and had a great time with online scavenger hunts and challenging one another about what did you bring to the picnic, what are you serving. It was great fun. And we would like to invite each one of you, because we have a Race Amity Day picnic scheduled for Sunday, June 12th from 2 to 5. It'll be hosted at the Baha'i Center, in Detroit on Greenfield Avenue, just south of 8 Mile. And we're expecting to have a wonderful time. And if you'd like to have more details about that, you can contact us too for those programs.
Thank you. A couple of other upcoming presentations this month on the 24th, which is our regular normal fourth Friday of the month gathering. We will be discussing anti-racism, and with an opening explanation by Ibram X. Kendi on how to be an anti-racist, where he explains why it's not enough to simply say we're not racist. Also, there will be short video with Dana Brown Lee on 10 ways to promote anti-racism. And Dana Brown Lee is a senior contributor at Forbes magazine. And our July gathering, the fourth Friday in July, July 22nd, we will have two children's book authors of African American stories, Carol Butler and Ann Stanton from Michigan, from Indiana and Michigan, respectively. Carol states, "It is our intent to motivate children to dare to dream." And Ann says, Ann Stanton Publications was created to provide inspiration to young readers through the life stories of real people.
So we're very much looking forward to these upcoming programs. And this has been our modus operandi, so to speak, for the past 3 years, as we've progressed from point to point as a single entity with a lone agenda, and we've become more community embracing in scope. We're pretty much self-contained. We've relied solely on ourselves to accomplish our goals. through inspiration, through consultation. We forge ahead, becoming more aware of opportunities. We cooperate with one another. We share potential ideas for programming. We're constantly looking and seeking within the framework of race amity. And I would say that as we are trying to put together our programs, we might look at as many as 10 or 15 different program possibilities, topics, ideas. Everything has to be filtered in terms of the amount of time it would take to develop the topic. We always want to create a forum in which we will stimulate thought and the ability for consultation amongst the people that attend our programs, because in the end, it is what people do with what they hear. It's how they respond to it. It's how they, what they take away from it, and how they're inspired to value the kinds of situations they found themselves in, and how they can use those situations to actually help to move the ball forward with race amity for our communities, for our families, and for our nation. So we are so happy to realize that our own framework has grown, that just in this past year, we've been asked to begin to share our story with other organizations. And the Troy Interfaith Group is one of those organizations that has asked us to share what our experience has been. What have we learned that might be helpful to you? So we are keenly interested in continuing to grow, and any feedback that you can give us, we very much appreciate. We are all in this together, so to speak. We're all led always by both the spirit of things and also the practical. What can we do in a practical way, in just a small way? We don't all have to be meeting the President of the United States to do something significant.
Thank you, David. Well, we're going to close with the following passage. The most important principle of divine philosophy is the oneness of the world of humanity, the unity of mankind, the bond conjoining East and West, the tie of love which blends human hearts. Therefore, it is our duty to put forth our greatest efforts and summon all our energies in order that the bonds of unity and accord may be established among mankind. That's from Otto Baha.
So at this point, we ask ourselves and we ask you to consider, what are our next steps? What can I take? What can you take in terms of any portion of this presentation to help initiate or implement efforts to eliminate racism, to collaborate with others, to aid in the process of social justice or racial healing or racial equity, and be of service to others? And always remembering that no step, no action, if it involves love, is too small. Just take it.
Because in other words, we are in heart and soul, always linked as one. So here's our contact information for anyone wishing to contact us. Our email address is Race Amity Forum Detroit Metro @yahoo.com. And we have a Facebook page, Race Amity Forum Detroit Metro. You can find us there. So that would be it.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for all of that. I feel like we're just being washed in all of the wisdom and discussions that that the Race Amity Forum has gleaned. So it might take us a while to sift through some of that information. But I did want to turn it to everyone that's here tonight and just see if there's any any thoughts, any questions, anything to ask a little bit more detail to be talked about, feel free to, if you don't want to be on voice, feel free to put a question or a comment in the chat below. Otherwise, wave at us so we know if you're about to talk, and feel free to click off mute. But this is a time if you have any other questions or anything to dig into a little bit more. Yeah, Ruth.
I forget, I had to unmute myself. I just wanted to thank you, David and Hermione, I don't know, I'm saying it wrong, but that was an excellent presentation, and it was obvious you spent so much time on it, and we can't thank you enough. I just was very impressed, so thank you.
You're welcome. It was our pleasure, actually. Part of our growing and learning process. So it's kind of a little crucible here where we're learning. So we appreciate any and all feedback. Thank you.
All right, so we have one question in the chat. Is the June 24th program on Zoom, or where could we invite people from our congregation to join? Is there like a flyer or something that we could put into our announcements or emails or anything like that?
We can send a flyer, and yes, it is on Zoom. So we'll be sure to get that to Ruth, and you can disseminate it through the organization.
Sounds good. All right, so expect a monthly email or one of our regular emails, and we'll put all that information below. And it sounds like you all are then welcome to then share it to the communities that you all are in. Jane, did I see a hand go up?
Yes, I just want to make a comment. I have attended several of their Zoom meetings. They're a very wonderful, loving group, and you can learn a lot. And please have no hesitation. You'll all be welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
Mm-hmm. So I actually have a question for you all, because I'm curious. As you said, towards the end of your presentation, you're at a point where you're trying to kind of share your all story. And I know that doing the work of the group is one thing, but then trying to like form and put it into a narrative is kind of a different process unto itself. So I'm curious if you all learned anything, or if anything came to light when you all started trying to put your story into words and into a PowerPoint, if something came to light that maybe you hadn't noticed before.
David.
Well, I can tell you this, at the beginning of every Race Amity forum, we do give a little bit of a summation of what we're about and how we got started, because we're not extraordinary human beings. When we first came together, we just wanted to form a study group and do something and learn a little bit. And after we took the class together, we so enjoyed meeting together and our friendships with one another that we wanted to continue to meet together. And we felt that the issue was a very important issue for our region. The metropolitan Detroit area is one of the most segregated areas in the country. And we felt that if we could help with this process of confronting in a positive way, helping people to come together, that this would be an important thing. So as we were putting together the program for this evening, what we did really was to talk about what would help others understand the path that we ended up taking, realizing that we did not, in the beginning, we did not say, oh, let's take a class and then we're going to have a Race Amity forum, and then we're gonna call it Race Amity, and then we're gonna have a Facebook page, and then we're gonna have. It was just like one thing, footsteps, one followed after the next, and it seems like the next step we are being called to take is to share some of the things that we have learned, some of the types of programs that people have found interesting, And it's not something that comes from us. We're being led because of our willingness to be led, I think, as much as anything. That's how I would interpret it. Hermione, what do you think?
I would only add the little conversation that we were having earlier as we were fine tuning our presentation, was that this process is helping to uncover who we are, what we've been, because it has a tendency, if you don't stop and just document per se, then you don't really know where you've been. You don't really know. You have an inkling. There's a cloud over there somewhere, but to roll it out in this fashion really helps clarify and solidify where we are, even though our growth and development has been fluid. It helps us to see the trail that we've been, traversing here. So that was a really great question, Chris, because it's exactly what we've been thinking about and what we've been talking about already. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of something one of my mentors once said is, I was given the advice that it's not sometimes enough just to walk the talk. Sometimes you also have to talk about the walk.
Exactly.
And that they go hand in hand, and sometimes we focus on making sure we're doing what we're saying, but if you're doing a lot of the doing, sometimes you have to work on figuring out how to talk about what you are doing. So I just want to thank you so much for meeting with us and doing some of that talking and telling us of how your group looks, and because it kind of helps us reflect on our story and kind of where the work that we do, and hopefully at some point the journey of both TIG and the Race Amity Forum will intersect, and we can combine and kind of find those places where our groups can make each other stronger. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, and thank you to everyone that is here tonight. Like I said, it's always lovely to take some time out to spend the time in community, even if we're still on Zoom. Our next one we are aiming to have in person, so we are excited to see you all in person. Quick reminders, just so you have the dates in your head as you head out. The TIG planning meeting for that in-person worship, or that in-person service, is on June 16th. The dates that you gave us, can you refresh us? I don't have the screen in front of us. We will get them on the email and email them out, but just so we have it one more time in our head.
This Sunday, June 12th, is the Race Amity picnic from 2 to 5. And then Friday, June 24th, is the upcoming Race Amity Forum monthly gathering beginning at 7, usually doesn't go past 8:30, on anti-racism. In July 20, what was that? I think it was the 22nd. The children's book authors, 2 women, one black, one white. Black one is married to someone white. White one is married to someone black. It's an interesting combo of those two. All of our Race Amity Forum gatherings are the 4th Friday of the month, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Amazing. All right. So
Also, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Jane, the other Jane, was trying to make a comment.
Oh, my apologies. I didn't see it. Jane, go for it.
It's a basic question. On your website and your Facebook page, do you have links to some of the programs that you previously had?
We have references to how to access the program for that evening, but not say if somebody gave a presentation that's not necessarily there. Some of our presentations are recorded, not all of them. And, but we could prepare some links to some of the TED Talks that we've, accessed, things like that, where just for general information, we could do that.
Yeah, we've been hesitant sometimes to record the conversations because sometimes people share some rather deep personal revealing things, and if they know they're going to be recorded, that might tend to put a damper on authentic and honest communication. So we've been saying, Lord knows they would be wonderful to be recorded and to be shared, because there's so much wonderful, sweet conversation that occurs. But that's partly why we have not recorded some of them. But resources we're more than willing to share or consult with anybody that wants to put anything together for any kind of a group. And while I have everybody's attention, I want to thank you so much, each one of you, for continuing the work of the Interfaith organization. I'm also part of the Common Word Alliance with Imam Arif Hushek in Detroit. And I really appreciate the sincerity and the outreach and the love that occurs and transpires between people of the various faiths, because in the end, we're all trying to relate to our Creator and build families and loving communities. So it's your mission is really, it's the same mission as the Race Amity mission. We're just another group out there working with the same difficulties in the greater environment, and trying to help everybody, unlock hidden potential that really ought to be allowed to come forth.
Yeah, I think you said it, David. So I think that, what more is there to add after that? So one more call if there's any other questions or clarifications. If not, feel free to, this is our moment of chaos at the end. Feel free to click off if you want to say hello and goodbye. And otherwise, everyone have a good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Love
Thanks.
you all. Love you all.